Thank you. Representative, you've heard a couple concerns raised about this law, in particular what Dr. Public has said about minors' use and how is this going to work into people's ability to drive and operate machinery and the like. These some of the issues you all are dealing with now?
Certainly all of those issues have come up and have been discussed by the task force, but I think what we have to realize is that no law is perfect when it starts out, whether it comes up from the legislature or whether it's an initiated bill. I think there are things in it that need to be fixed. I think the task force actually has looked at the age issue and is considering whether or not they're going to put an age limit on it. But much of that discussion really came back to the fact that we're going to have to trust the medical professionals that we license here in this state to use good judgment about those things. And it's not appropriate for a 10-year-old or a 6-year-old, even though the law would allow it. And to think that there would be a physician who would recommend it, I think is kind of stretching. And so we've put a lot of faith and trust in the physicians who are going to be writing the certificates.
And the people who voted saw one sentence on Election Day. They had no idea about this provisions pertaining that Dr. Publicker is concerned about. They had no idea that people would be allowed to possess 5 ounces every 4 weeks. They had no idea that special protections in employment and housing, and just down there's a whole list of things which are objectionable, which the people had no idea. Maine people wanted sick people whose doctor said it was a good idea to be able to access marijuana safely. That's what you can conclude from the election results. But all of this other stuff in the law is completely superfluous, and I'm sure most people would be very surprised that if they knew they'd voted on that. And so I hope the committee, and from what Representative Haskell tells me, it seems that they're addressing these issues responsibly.
Yeah, but isn't that really kind of a criticism, though, of the initiative process itself? I mean, it's always a one-sentence deal, and often there's a lot behind that in the first place. I mean, we never have one that actually lays it all out in that detail. There's always an invitation, ultimately, to say, go and look at that in more detail. And in the end, it is what it is, and it is passed now, and it's up to, of course, people like Representative Haskell and other people in the task force to figure that out and implement that which it is. We can't go behind what the reasons were, perhaps.
The initiative process is good at some things, but whether medicine available to people should be decided by the FDA or by a popularity contest on Election Day with who has the most money to push their agenda, I think those are legitimate questions to be concerned about.
Hold on one second, Eric. Let me come back here.
I think the government probably has a lot more money to push around for their agenda than the people do, sir. We're the ones that got the thing going in the first place because the state would not do anything about getting patients their medicine in the first place. Now the state wants to take control of growing it. When they have no relationship with this plant, it just seems like a ridiculous thing to me. And just by listening to the man in front of me talk, it just proves that the stigma still is prevalent here in this society. Even though the law is passed, people still have the stigma, and people still, they associate patients that use marijuana. They don't associate it on the same level as the people that use pharmaceuticals, let's say. People are driving around every day on pharmaceutical drugs. People are driving around every day on medical marijuana or marijuana. You're not going to see a great increase. If it's happening already.
Let me go back to Dr. Public, if I can, because you agree with that? This is just another drug like the other drugs that you're prescribing?
No, I don't. I think it's important to recognize that nowhere in the legislation is there a mention of addiction. And this is a major gap. I've been treating people with addiction for 30 years. I promise you, virtually every patient I treat, whether it's for heroin addiction, cocaine addiction, or alcoholism, is dependent on cannabis. So we shouldn't minimize the risk of addiction. The fact that the law makes no mention of it concerns me. The other issue, though, in response to Representative Haskell, I am unfortunately not sanguine that we're going to have a large body of highly qualified ethical physicians qualifying patients. There's nothing in our system that allows a mechanism for quality assurance for physicians. This is likely going to be a cash cow. There's nothing which limits physicians who have lost their DEA license, who have lost their medical privileges, who have defrauded Medicare and Medicare and can no longer participate. There is a recommendation for screening but there can't be a mandate because no one in the state goes into doctor's offices without a complaint.
Thank you, Doctor. Let us take the last couple of minutes here and ask each of you, if we could, if you could change one thing about the way our society deals with marijuana here in the state of Maine. You're going to be king or queen for a day. What would you do? Let's start with you, Dr. Public.
I think we already have de facto decriminalization. I would like to see more education about the negative effects, because what I'm hearing is it's an unmitigated good. No drug is.
Thank you. Representative Haskell.
If I was queen for a day, I think this would be a very difficult issue because there are a lot of things to balance. But I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that this is what the people voted for, and I think we need to find a way to make it work.
Mr. District Attorney.
I agree with Representative Haskell. I respect the will of the voters on a more pedestrian scale. I really wish that we could judge somebody's impairment with marijuana as readily as we do with alcohol and toxicalizer machines, so that the concerns that Dr. Publiker had would be instantly answered. We don't have that in this state, and that's of grave concern to me.
Don, one change.
Well, the problem here is the biggest problem in this state is that we have so few doctors who are recognizing that marijuana is medicine, and that we need to get them on board and get them to do their jobs, because this is a very good medicine, and it's not a special medicine. It's just an herb that God put here, and it needs to be looked at by many doctors, not just a few in the state. They should be doing their jobs and doing what their patients want them to do.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, one change. King for a day.
It'll be conjunctive change. It would allow.
I'm sure I know what that means.
It would allow for every patient who needed medical marijuana to be able to get it, to be readily available to them in the amount that they needed it, and for the folks who are providing the medical marijuana to do it in such a way that they weren't overly regulated, and they were allowed to provide it and have it be accessible when people needed it.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
I agree with Dan, and I just would like to see that patients and caregivers would not be arrested anymore.
I would, yeah, pretty much the same thing, but just to get rid of the stigma, to realize that medical marijuana is a medicine. It is a medicine. And just to get rid of the stigma, to allow patients to have immediate and safe access to whatever they need. I know 2.5 ounces may seem a lot to someone for every 15 days, but not when you're cooking with it, not when you're knocking the trichomes off the buds with a sieve just to use it in cooking, let's say. It's really not, there's concentrated forms in which you can make it. It's really not a lot of medicine.
Thank you. Doctor, you get the last word.
I'd provide a lot of education so that the public can feel more comfortable with the benefits of medical marijuana and also to understand the risks of addiction. And I think physicians need to be encouraged to participate, and they also need to have the right resources available to them so they would know how to apply it appropriately in their medical practice.
Thank you. And Walter, we're going to have one more comment tonight from somebody else, aren't we?
Yes, our very own Gary Crocker with his own personal Wes Gardner spin on medical marijuana.